Good afternoon, everyone present here. I'm your host, Hetal for today's session. Want to start a business? Good. There are so many entrepreneurs out there struggling day in and day out to set up their dream organization. They gave their best shot and did not leave any stone unturned in their work. Every entrepreneur hires the best people to do the job that are suitable for them. Things are turning on the entrepreneur, but there are so many roadblocks that hit them so hard. Here, by roadblock, I mean legal roadblock. To find the roadblock, every entrepreneur hires a legal advisor or a legal service, which is quite costly. Instead, wouldn't it be best if the entrepreneur knew the basic main laws that surrounds the entrepreneur ventures like advertising law, finance law, privacy law, etc. And for that, do we have to start studying law? No, we are just a step behind to gain that knowledge. I would like you all to meet Miss Hetal Kudecha, who has immense knowledge about the law field. She is an expert in corporate law and an advisor on various processes such as India entry option, fraud evaluation, and compliance matter. She has led health checks and due diligences for companies during mergers and acquisitions and provided remedial support. In addition, she is specialized in advising companies on matters related to insolvency and bankruptcy code, including voluntary restructuring and liquidation of companies. I would now welcome Ms. Hetal Kudecha to enlighten us with her words.
Hi guys, thank you so much for that introduction. And before I start this, I am going to be making it interactive. So I will be asking for some random questions, and I hope you guys can participate so that you understand that law is not boring, right? It's not a lot of things that you have to remember. To begin with, I think I feel good because this is my first time in an engineering and a technology college. So it's great to see that wannabe engineers and all the technology aspirants here want to be entrepreneurs. So great going, wonderful decision, and also a good initiative by your entrepreneurial self. So all in all the best to all of you, right? So before I go on to this presentation, very roughly, how many of you want to be startup founders? Okay, that is a very healthy thing. You guys just want to work as somebody in a company, and nothing wrong with that. So the role of when there are startup founders, there have to be people who actually also work with them, right? So absolutely fine. So when you think of startup, what does it come to your mind? Or when you think of a startup from a legal perspective, I know you might not know a lot, but what it is that comes to your mind? कि startup चालू करना है, तो क्या करेंगे सबसे पहले? Register. You fill a piece of paper and you will register. Trademark. Okay. What else comes to your mind? Startup, and what other word is similar, synonymous to a startup? So when you think of startup, what do you think? To be very honest, what I think is innovation and technology. Because a lot of startups are actually founded in the space of, they do a lot of innovation and there is a lot of focus on tech startups. You will find there are very, very few non-tech startups, right? Which are service-based startups. But the focus is largely India being a technology-driven entity. I mean, a country, not an entity. India being a technology-driven country going forward. And there's going to be a lot of impetus on it, right? So let's start. Getting around the law like an entrepreneur. A little bit about me. I'm an entrepreneur who's also a lawyer, right? Who's also a company secretary. So my startup is all about providing legal services. So it is a startup which is based on a services sector, right? I have 21 years of work experience. Started working in 2001. Well, very ancient to most of you. Yeah. So I started working in 2001. I was working with one of India's leading law firms for 11 and a half years. Then I was working with a consulting company called Ernst & Young. A lot of you must know it as EY, if you've heard of it. So EY is one of the bigger consultants at a global level, right? So I was working with them for 2.5 years. Thereafter, I was working for a .com company. So this company, which I'm talking about, is called Lexite. Lexite.com. I don't think many of you must have heard about it because it's a legal publishing portal. Okay, so that's why you've not heard of it. Doesn't have anything to do with code. Doesn't have anything to do with technology except the backend, right? So yeah. So collective experience in helping companies and startups now, in terms of helping them stay compliant and take them through the landscape of regulatory challenges, right? From last 2 years, I founded Decidium Solutions, which is my company. Does anybody know what Decidium means? Okay, Decidium in Latin means to disrupt, right? So my intent is to disrupt the legal market by providing services at a very affordable and competitive prices to startups who do not have a lot of money to pay legal fees. Right? So that is why I founded Decidium. Let's go ahead and see what are the types of legal structures. Right? I asked you guys, what is it that comes to your mind when you think of startup? So register karna, right? Some people said register karna, some people said IPR, which is a trademark, which is an IPR. So these are the different kinds of legal entity structures. You could do your startup as a sole proprietor. Now, this is something which is extremely basic. You don't have to register anywhere, right? Like if you are 18 years plus, and if you have an idea, and if you have a brand, you can go to a bank and you can tell them, I want to set up a sole proprietorship. And you have to obtain what is called a GST. Full form, anybody? Superb. So yeah, you have goods and services tax. You obtain a GST number for your startup or your sole proprietorship. You open a bank account and you're good to go. Right now, this is one of the most unregulated form of legal structures because the only thing you have to do is tax compliances, right? So even if you have your own sole proprietorship, you will still need to have accounts. You will need to finalize those accounts. You have to file your IT returns. Correct? But that is largely the compliance. As opposed to other kinds of structured entities that has a lot more compliances. Again, sole proprietorship, you have something called one-person company. My company is a one-person company, right? What it means is that there is only one member and one director. It's a lot like your sole proprietorship, but it falls under the gambit of the Companies Act. Now, the Companies Act is a mega legislation that governs all the entity registrations, which is a private company, a public company, a one-person company, right? So, one-person company is again a similar setup. Everything remains the same like a sole proprietorship, but your liability is limited. Let me explain you the small example. You start a company. So let's say first of all you start a sole proprietorship company. Okay, let's say any one brand. Any of you who said who's going to be a startup founder? Oh, what's your brand going to be?
It's gonna be an analytics brand.
So just name it something.
Let us see. D analytics.
Sorry,
D analytics.
D for Delhi. D analytics.
D.
Okay. So let's say what's your name? Sorry.
Aditya.
Let's say Aditya's startup is D Analytics, okay? And he says that I have this wonderful idea, I'm going to go and have this startup, and I'm going to do all analytics related work, right, for companies. So he can do one thing, he can start a sole proprietorship company. Usme what he will do is he will go to a trademark agency, probably, register his logo, and have his entity structure. I mean, not any of this formal structures, but he will have an entity representation called D Analytics. And for 6 months, he does his work, right? He goes to various companies, he approaches individuals, and he does his work. What will he do? He doesn't need to do anything. He goes to a bank, he has a separate bank account in the name of D Analytics, right? He has a GST number. Khatam. You do your GST filings, and you're done. But let's say, for example, what happens is in the 4th month of providing services, he's borrowed so much money from the bank, or he's borrowed money from investors, right? And I don't mean proper investors, I mean people who lend you money, right? Institutions. Now, say he's borrowed 1 crore and he wanted to use it for his own startup. But unfortunately, the startup tanks, right? And the money that the people have lent him, they have to be given back, correct? Let's say he has a Honda City, right, with him. Now, what will happen is if he has a sole proprietorship, his liability, which is essentially the 1 crore rupees that he has to pay back, is completely his. Which means all the lenders can tell him, look, you go and sell your Honda City, but you give me my money back. Okay? So the liability is unlimited. In a sole proprietorship, your personal liability is unlimited. Whatever you have can be attached. Right? Now, if he had formed a one-person company, which is essentially a private company, or it can be, it's in the form of a private company only because it's only one member. And he says, my liability is only 1,000. Same scenario. If he borrows 1 crore, if the startup tanks, hopefully it won't. If the startup tanks, right, and the lenders come after him, they can't do anything, right? Because it is an entity that is registered under the company law with limited liability. So all he will say is that I will give you 1,000 rupees. The rest I will say that I am filing for insolvency. जब आएगा तब देखेंगे, right? One of the most important lessons I wanted to drive home on this point legally is that whenever you want to do something, before you start borrowing heavily, you are aware of MPV, minimum viable product, right? So every startup will have something which is called the minimum viable product. When you have that and you need the money for that, please take it from friends and family. Do not go out and borrow if you need it, because then repayment becomes an issue and you will be unnecessarily caught up in legal tangles, right? Which is why the initial money that comes from friends and family is usually called the pre-seed money. I think you've studied yesterday, you must have done some pitches, right? You had a pitch perfect yesterday.
Yep.
Yes.
So you must have gotten an idea about what happens when pitching happens and the various stages in a pitch, where you have to prepare your financial documents, present, talk about your startup, right? So when you come to that stage, you please leave it and ensure that before you're getting into any kind of commitment with any external investor, you have an entity, right? So I told you about sole proprietorship and one-person company. One-person company में कोई पैसा नहीं देगा, because if they have to give you money, then they want a stake in the company, correct? They will want some stake. They will want some benefit from you, unless it is a grant. I believe there was somebody who covered government grants before this. There was a session in the morning on government grants. So you are aware of what is government grants, right? You get funding from the government in the form of a grant. So there are various schemes. You don't really need to pay that money back, and that is the best. Now you prove to the government that you want money to invest in this idea. You tell the government that this is my idea and this is what I want to do, and they'll give you a grant if they believe in it. So go for grants, right? Go for funds from family and friends, which do not carry any interest, which even if you actually sink because you are working on a startup and you're still working on your viability product, it's okay, right? So go for government grants and go for seed money, which is okay not to be repaid, right? The other one is the traditional partnership and limited liability partnership. Have you heard of these terms? So what is the difference? Anybody has a broad idea? Partnership firm and LLP. LLP to suna hoga, right? A lot of people talk about LLP. So what is it?
LLP, the liability of a partner is limited to a certain value, after which the personal assets would be targeted if the company tanks or any sort of time of stress arises to the company and the company is not able to pay.
So you mean to say in LLP a personal assets
The
are
liability is limited.
So if the liability is limited, then the personal assets cannot be tagged.
Yeah.
Right? Not that they are tagged. They cannot be tagged.
They cannot be attacked.
And in a traditional partnership,
Yes, they can be.
so it's a lot like your sole proprietorship and your one-person company.
Yeah.
Correct? An LLP is a good form of setting off an entity. If you know what your project is, if you're doing a specific project, if you have limited number of partners, right? But in my experience, what I have largely seen with a lot of startup companies is that they prefer to go the private limited route, right? The third type of entity, private limited and public limited. So a lot of startups think that they want money, right? Now that's a completely different conversation. Anybody who thinks of starting a startup or aspires to start one will think that I will receive the valuation like Byju's in 1 year, and I will be a multimillionaire by the third year, right? So this is not a reality, right? If you're starting up, you please understand expectations. Talk to people who can guide you in the correct way. The whole reason of starting a startup has to be that you want to make a difference, right? You're solving a problem, right? Or is your problem that there is less money? No. You are solving an economic problem, right? Which is going to help you get the money. Correct? So when you're doing a private limited company, there is an option of selling a percentage or a stake, right? That percentage or stake can only be done in a private limited company, not an LLP. In LLP, the route is a little different. You have to do it via getting in a partner to your existing partnership, but then that partner has to pay a certain amount to become a partner, and traditionally that is not a favored vehicle, right? With a lot of lenders, whether they are angel investors, whether they are HNIs, which are high net worth individuals, or venture capitalists or private equity funds, right? These are the people who will not really prefer an LLP structure, and they'll want to do a private limited company. Now, private limited company is just like your one-person company, but it has 2 directors and 2 members, with an option of adding more directors and more members, right? So that is something that you should set up. But if you have an idea, this is not the stage. If you have an idea, do not register the company, correct? If you have to register your IP, which is an intellectual property, it could be a trademark. You guys could do a process or an innovation, then it will be a patent, right? It could be any different kind of entity. It could be a design if you're doing a structure. So any kind of design, right? But an idea cannot be patented. So that's very clear that you cannot patent an idea. You need to have either a process. You would need to show some kind of innovation. You can do it in the founder's name. You can do it in your name, right? If you think it is your idea, if you think that product is yours, you can have the trademark, you can have the IP in your name, and later on, 6 months ke baad, when you form a company, you can transfer it to the company. But just because you have to have an IP doesn't mean you have to have a company. Like that is a distinction I want to stress on and let you know. Correct? You don't really need a company to register an IP. As an individual, you can do it. Right? A public company is a company like Nika, which is a listed company. It has like lots of shareholders. It starts with 7 shareholders and 3 directors, and it can go on and on, like the Tatas, the Reliance, the Nikas, the PhonePays, all of them. Correct? Lots of compliances, not really relevant to you as a group right now. Public limited companies, they come into play much, much later. Right? The most relevant form of structure, please. Most relevant form of structure for you is one person, LLP, or a private limited company, depending on where you are with your startup idea, innovation, minimum viable product, wherever you are. Any questions on this, up to this so far? Anything that you want to ask or unsure about?
In sole proprietorship, is there any cap limit for how much revenue I have to file ITR or something like that. That in basic we have not that.
Yeah. So you have to look at your tax exemptions, right? Every year the finance minister will come with various tax exemptions. So because you're a sole proprietorship, your IT return and your company's IT return will be the same. Correct?
Okay, this is my personal one and
Yes,
company.
yes, because you're a sole proprietor. So then if you fall in that exemption slab, I believe it's become 7 lakh this year onwards, you don't have to pay tax, and then progressively, as and when you make more money, you have to pay that much
So do I
tax.
need to file just ITR, not to pay tax, but to file ITR?
Always a good idea to file a nil ITR.
But it's not compulsory, right? And
But what is compulsory is that you have to prepare a return, and if that return has nil, then as your startup, which has a current account, you should probably file a nil return, right? But file a return.
And what if in later stage that from one person I increases to 2 or 3% or just add more people in my
No. So
company?
here's the difference. Sit. Here's the difference. I can add 100 people to my company as an OPC, no problem. But they are employees, they are advisors, they are not shareholders. So a shareholder is somebody who holds stake in a company. So my OPC is mine, one person company. I hold 100% of its shares, right? And I can hire you as my chief technology officer. I can hire somebody else as my chief marketing officer, right? I can hire 10 different people, but I don't really need to change my structure.
But for
If you want a stake, if you want to give a stake, right? If you want to get an investor who will take a stake, or let's say if you're hiring somebody not for money, you don't have the money to pay, right? But you will tell that person, look, I will give you 5% of my company if you join me. So then you have to convert to a private limited company.
so it's feasible not to convert.
Yes, of course it's feasible. In fact, if the threshold of 2 crores of turnover is reached for an OPC, it has to convert to a private limited, right? So you know it's not 2 crores for me yet. So yeah, there are certain thresholds in place. The most important thing is not to try and interpret the law yourself, right? It's one thing to have knowledge, it's another thing to do it yourself. If you sit and try and draft a contract, I am telling you, you'll be in trouble. I mean, by him, I don't mean him, I mean all of you, right? Because you have not studied how to draft a contract. You don't know the important clauses that will go in a contract. You don't know how to protect yourself or your startup, right? So talk to somebody who has legal knowledge and who is actually able to give you the right kind of advice, right? Okay. Okay. You need to be legally aware of all these points, right? Since the topic for today was, how to take care of law as an entrepreneur, I have listed down certain points that I think you should be aware of as an entrepreneur going forward on the legal side. One is the right kind of structuring, right? I mean, if you know in your mind that you want to raise equity or you want to raise capital in the form of equity or debt, then you will not form a sole proprietorship or one person company, right? It's not going to help you. Because if you are raising money and that person is going to need any kind of stake in your company, then you have to have a private limited company. So choose the right kind of entity. Licensing requirements, the most important requirement of all, right? Every entity, even a sole proprietorship will have licensing, right? It has GST requirements. So if you see a company has various licensing requirements from various regulations, right? It is per se governed by the company law, Companies Act. So there are various other registrations you need to take. There's something called permanent account number, assuming all of you have it in your personal name. Similarly, your company also needs to have that. Then there's something called the tax deduction account number, which is called TAN, which you don't have it as individuals, but because the company is registered, any payment the company does over a particular threshold, they have to deduct tax at source, which is called TDS. Right? So once you get the TAN, once your company is formed, then you get a TAN number, you have to deduct tax at source. So that is again a registration. In Maharashtra, there is something called profession tax, right? There's something called shops and establishment registration. If you exceed a certain number of employees in your company, then you have to take that license as well. These are very, very basic licenses, right? Now, if you are into manufacturing, if your startup is an MSME startup, right? You know what's an MSME? Full form? Sorry, one person? Correct. It's a micro, small, and medium enterprises. They are usually enterprises that produce goods or manufacture goods that aid larger companies, right? They're essentially the raw material that go as a part of finished goods by larger companies. So if you are an MSME, if you're a factory, then you need additional licenses, right? You need to have your factory's license, you need your licenses under the industrial order, the standing order, then you need to take care of equal remuneration. I mean, let me tell you, there is 1,000 licenses that you have to take. It's not very easy starting a manufacturing entity or a non-service entity because there are a lot of set of rules, regulations, and licenses that you have to take care of, right? So licensing requirements will differ on the type of entity, on the type of activity the entity is doing, whether it is processing, whether it is services. Like I'm a services company, right? So I have PAN, I have TAN, I have profession tax because I'm registered in Maharashtra. That is it. I do not have to file for GST. Do you know why? Any idea? Why? I mean, do you think I'm violating a law if I'm not filed for GST? I have not filed for GST. Now just say yes or no from whatever limited knowledge you have.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
That I'm violating a law?
Yeah.
Okay. So there is a threshold limit, right? If your income does not exceed a particular level, you do not need to apply for GST. Right? So if you're starting, obviously you don't need to. Take advantage of that. Speak to somebody who can help you understand the whole tax regime, the compliance regime, your accounting. Okay, and there's also the people element. Correct? You will need to hire somebody, at least in whatever kind of field you are in. So yeah, all the mandatory licenses and compliances is something that everybody needs to take care of. India is becoming amazing to do business. You must have read it everywhere, right? Made in India, great to do business in India, ease of doing business in India. What is happening is that the licensing requirements are becoming easier, but the compliance of it is becoming stronger, which means that the government will actually crack up on you if you do not comply with the laws, right? There is a lot of emphasis that is placed on self-certification. Going forward in the next slide, I'll tell you something about Startup India. Everybody's aware, right?
Yes.
That there's something called Startup India. So if you're a part, if you've registered under Startup India, then maybe you will actually be able to claim a lot of benefits from there, right? But whatever it is, even if you're a part of Startup India, even if you're registered under Startup India, even if you've received government grants, you have to comply with your basic licenses and registrations. It is a non-negotiable thing for you as an entrepreneur, right? A lot of people fail. A lot of people fail to do it. I will give you one example. I was talking to a founder. That founder got the company formed on Monday at 2 p.m., right? And he showed a board meeting on Monday at 9 a.m. So was he right or wrong? Yeah, come on, guys. Are you sleepy? Wake up. If a company is formed at 2 p.m., can the meeting for a company be held at 9 a.m.? But he did it. Right? He showed a company meeting for a company that was not there. Correct? Incorrect. So under the Companies Act, what happens is that this meeting is not considered valid because there is no company. So the company cannot have a meeting, right? So you need you need to be careful. This is what happens when you try and do things on your own about which you have no knowledge. This is equivalent of me trying to write a small code. I will have no idea, right? Maybe a first year student can do a better job than I can because I know I have zero knowledge about a code. I maybe just know the opening p tag and closing p tag. I mean, that's all I probably know about coding. But nonetheless, if I try and do something that is not my domain, it is understood that I'm going to mess up. So the first and the most important thing for you guys to do is get, even if your friends, even if your family, even if your extended startup community people tell you, "Arey, ye ekdam simple hai, tu khud kar sakta hai." No, nothing to take away from them. You can do it, but please make sure you do the right thing, right? Do not apply for something where you know an application is not required. You'd be just wasting time and money, right? Can't stress enough on the licensing requirements. According to me, one of the most important things you will do as a startup founder is to ensure that you remain compliant. Neither you end up paying fines. Fine, fine. Your startup will do business of 1 lakh. If you're not compliant, you will use the entire 1 lakh to pay fines. That's not something you want, right? So please remain compliant. So coming from 2 to 3 is compliance with all the laws, right? What I spoke about is the Companies Act, but there is labor, there is IT, there is tax. IT is income tax, not information technology. Just letting you know. So income tax laws, labor laws, there's various other laws. There are compliances on the IP front as well, right? When you do your trademark, when you do your patent, they are granted for certain number of years, correct? So then you have to ensure that you renew them. The important part in trademark is also you need to see that you are not infringing anybody else's trademark and nobody is infringing your trademark, correct? Important points for all techies, important points for any innovator, right? Anybody who is into the space of technology innovation will find it very, very important to work on IPR, that is intellectual property right laws, IPR laws, right? You will have those huge, you know what are SaaS companies? You know what SaaS, all of you, right? Software as a service. You'll have these huge SaaS softwares, you'll have SaaS companies, and then you're going to have all those royalty agreements. Trust me, SaaS softwares, you'll have SaaS companies, and
Sorry.
whatever you need now, do not put your brains into the legal agreements for now. The best is to get somebody to do it, right? Contractual obligations. What do you understand by the term? If I tell you about contractual obligations, means what? What is the full form of NDA, my friend?
Non-disclosure agreement.
Yes, amazing. So NDA is okay. What is an NDA?
For example, if I'm getting with a co-founder, so I sign a not.
Yeah, you're telling me what? I mean, I want to know what kind of a document it is.
To not disclose something that it's case sensitive or something like that.
Okay. So an NDA is a contract, correct? So when you talk about contractual obligations, you are actually talking about everything that deals with contracts. That includes your NDAs, that includes your other agreements. If you have a vendor, right, from whom you're buying some raw material, you're buying something, and you have a contract with that vendor, then you have to make the payment, right? If you do not make the payment, you will be held liable. Under the MSME law, you can classify your company as small, micro, medium and obtain a registration which is called Udyam registration. Are you guys aware?
Yes.
So if you do an Udyam registration, then you have obtained that registration and any person you are liable to make payment to, or anybody who has to make payment to you has to do it in 45 days. Correct? Otherwise, they will be on the wrong side of law. So do that. Your contractual obligations are actually things that talk about honoring all your agreements. If you have a vendor agreement, a buyer's agreement, a sales agreement, okay, the most important contract that you as a founder will have with your company is your articles of association and a memorandum of association, right? Now, these are the two charter documents of a company. These documents actually define your relationship with the company. It will tell you what it is that you can do, what are the objects that you can pursue. For example, if you form a company, like the gentleman there, he can form an analytics company, but he cannot really do advertising there, correct? Because his company is formed only for doing analytical work. So you cannot really do anything that you are not allowed to do. Before Companies Act 2013, long ago, you could have objects, like 10 objects in a company, which means I could have objects about advertising, mining, legal, I could have advertising, legal, manufacturing, everything, correct? But the new act, that's Companies Act 2013, now allows you to do only one thing at a time, so that you do not end up using one company or one activity as a shelter to do other things. Legitimacy and transparency, that is important under the present law. So honor all your contractual obligations. Be legally aware of what your contractual obligations are. At the very base level, you need to really be aware of what agreements you're signing, right? A lot of people, and I don't mean that against any founders, I've seen a lot of people just sign the last page. If you are given an agreement, do you read it? Do you understand what's there in that agreement? No, a lot of people actually will say, okay, I have to focus on doing business. So please give me what I need to sign. I will sign it and I will be done. That's it. Great, but if somebody then makes you sign on something that all your business is mine, you're happily signing it. Right? Hopefully nobody will do that to you. But please make sure you read what you're signing and you fulfill your obligations in that manner. Correct? Event-based compliances. What do you mean by event-based compliances? If I have a company in Maharashtra and tomorrow the government says, the Delhi government comes up with very good schemes, right? The Delhi government says that I will give you 100% tax holiday for next 10 years. You don't have to pay tax only for next 10 years. If you have a company in Delhi, right? So what I will do?
Move to Delhi.
I will move my company from Maharashtra to Delhi. So this is an event, right? These are event-based compliances. This is just an example. There could be any number of event-based compliances depending on what it is that your company does, what is the nature of your company. Okay? So adhering to event-based compliances, taking them seriously, do not take any compliances lightly. Even after spending 20 years, I sometimes forget things, right? As opposed to people who have no knowledge of law or legal compliances. If you think कि मैं कल कर लूँगा या कल कर लूँगी, then you are making a big mistake. That tomorrow will never come. You will forget, and then the income tax department or the registrar of companies will slap a notice on you and say, okay, here it is. This is what you were supposed to do. You've not done. Pay lakhs of rupees. You will not know what hit you. And then you will pay double that money to a consultant to come out of the problem. So it's a vicious circle, correct? So the bottom line is to stay compliant from day zero. You start thinking of something, think compliance. Think of how you will do things so that aage chalke things are easier for you, right? And not difficult. And last point. Do things within the timelines to avoid penalty, right? If the government is giving you certain leeway, it's giving you certain relaxations, it's telling you that you don't really need to do something. Along with that, they will also then say that, look, I am giving you this permission, but if you do not do this, okay, within this time, as per the relaxed timeline, you will have to pay 10 times penalty. I will give you a small example. Under the company law, if I'm a director in any company, any other company other than my company, and that company is not compliant, then I cannot be a director in any other company, including my own company. Correct? So, the penal consequences are consequences that relate and involve money. So the penal consequences are very high. there are certain provisions across different laws that involve penal provisions and criminal prosecution, right? What's a criminal prosecution? You can be arrested and you can go to jail. That's it. Correct? So, not all offenses are criminal. Okay, a lot of it, at least under the ease of doing business in India, what the government is doing and what the Ministry of Company Affairs is doing is they are actually trying to decriminalize a lot of offenses, right? Because they understand that people actually do a lot of defaults, and at every point of time, if we keep putting everybody in jail, then India's ranking will be last in ease of doing business in India, right? Which is why they are decriminalizing a lot of expenses, but the penal provisions are there. You will end up paying hefty penalties if you do not comply with the law across the board, right? This is a little heavy. Anybody has any questions? I don't know if you actually even understood what I'm saying. I'm trying to simplify it as much as I can without using the legal jargon so that all of you can understand.
Ma'am, do people really pay the?
Fine. Yes, they pay.
I mean, like you said, like they have to pay some amount of money in
Yeah.
order to, for example, taxes and stuff. So do they really pay, or do they find a loophole and just?
So that's the job of a chartered accountant, right? If you have an amazing chartered accountant, you'll find a way out for you, right? Similarly, lawyers. So, okay, one thing about lawyers and chartered accountants specifically, I'm saying because they are key stakeholders in this business, is that yes, they will help you stay compliant, but they will also stop you from doing things that you're not required to do. Correct? But tax evasion is not that practice. You have to pay taxes, right? You may take a set off. मतलब कि अगर if you're doing an X business and you have a tax liability of 10,000, आपने Y business किया है, then उसमें अगर loss है, तो you can legitimately set off, right? But if you have to pay tax, then you have to pay tax. If you fall in that taxable bracket, you have to pay tax. Similarly, in legal and law, contractual obligations, if your contract says something, then you have to do it. But if your contract says it's vague, correct? If the contract uses the word may, if the contract uses the word shall, then if it may happens, then when it can happen. So what lawyers can do and what lawyers usually do is that they will pick up that particular clause and spin it and into different interpretations, right? Depending on whether you are this side or this side, you are either the victim or the beneficiary. So if that lawyer is for you, then maybe that person can work with you, right? If it is not required, it's not required. I'll give you a very small example practically of what a good clause can do to your startup. If you're a service company like mine, and if I'm a retainer with you, let's say you're paying me 10,000 rupees a month, right? Which comes to 1,20,000 rupees a year. Now, something happens in the course of 1 year, and you have an exposure to some fine, right? You receive a notice from some regulator saying you have not done shit that you were supposed to do, and your exposure is actually 2 lakhs, right? I can put a clause in my agreement and say that my liability is only limited to 6 months of the money you have to pay me, which means that if there is anything that is subsequently discovered, whoever's fault it is, right? Whether it's my fault, whether it's the company's fault, for whatever reason, if you have not paid, if you have to pay because of a legal issue, then my liability, I will only be responsible for 60,000. If you have to pay 2 lakhs, you can recover up to 60,000 from me, nothing more. Now, this is an example of a clause that you can put in your agreements, right, to cap your liability. Right? You understand what is the meaning of capping liability? It means exposing yourself to the liability that the regulators or your vendors may have. So yeah, this is the beauty of lawyers, your tax people, your structuring people, your compliance professionals, right? So stay within this box. I'm not sure you can do this all the time at 100%. I do not really think there is a business in India that is 100% compliant. Ever, right? But you please make sure you are as compliant as you can be. Okay? The next is I have put down some key documents which are relevant to startups, right? Which I look at day in, day out. Founders agreement. Have you heard of founders agreement? Do you know what is a founders agreement? So if you have two founders, one founder, another founder, they are co-founders, correct? Chances are that you will need one more founder. Like if your strength is tech, that other person's strength could be, yeah, tech and marketing go hand in hand, right? But it could also be finance, it could also be legal, it could be anything, correct? So when two people come together to do business, even before they form a company, even before you start working on your minimum viable product, you execute something which is called the founders agreement, right? What the founders agreement will say, okay, my name, your name, it will state what our capabilities are. It will clearly state what it is that we are bringing to the company. It will state that in case of a fight between us, what will happen, right? It's quite possible that today you're best friends. 10 years down the line, you may be sworn enemies, correct? For whatever reason, you don't get along. Your working styles are different. You realize that it's not all that great. So that agreement will tell you what to do with your stake and my stake. I cannot stress enough. I mean, kuch nahi karte ho, please do make a founders agreement. You will save yourself so much of hard work, so much of agony. I hope that agreement never comes to court, and I hope you never have problems. But in the eventuality that you do have a problem, a founders agreement is a document that actually states everything, correct? It can also state that, okay, this IP belongs to me. If you quit, you cannot take it. It can also state that, okay, you cannot join a competing business for 2 years. It can state everything you want and you can think of to protect your business, correct? So founders agreement is an agreement between the founders. It has nothing to do with the company. It can be executed even before the company is formed, right? Shareholders agreement is when I am investing in your company. I want certain rights. I want a percentage in your company's ownership. I will tell you my conditions, okay, what I want in exchange of that 5%. So that will be captured in the shareholders agreement, right? Startup India registration. Everybody knows, right? Don't need me to go into details. Any questions on Startup India? You need to be 1 to 10 years old. Your entity has to be either a private limited company or an LLP. Sole proprietorships cannot apply for Startup India, right? You need to have a new product. Your product cannot be something, or your company cannot be a result of a split, right? If there's a company in existence and you split that company and take up like 50% of that and form another company, so that company is not eligible for Startup India registration and take the benefits over there, right? So that is it. And there are lots of benefits, right? Especially for techies and innovators. You get to keep there is an option in the 10-year period. You are exempt from tax for 3 years. So you can decide which 3 years you don't want to pay tax, right? And that is possible only if you have that Startup India registration. For IP people, there is a significant relaxation of fees for trademark and patent. If you are an innovator, if you are thinking of going for a patent registration, then please know that it's a very expensive affair, right?
Ma'am, like you said, if we are registered under Startup India, we can get that. Like we cannot pay taxes for 3 years.
Cannot make.
Like
It's an option.
That option. So is it like to do in a specific amount of years?
Yes.
Or
So a startup is considered a startup for the first 10 years. Khatam. After the 10th year, you're no longer considered a startup under the DPIIT. That certificate that you get is valid for the first 10 years.
Is that startup duration closely related to the revenue it generates throughout the journey?
When you want to apply for registrations, they do not ask you for revenue. but they will ask you about what it is that you can do for the country. As in, like, if you see that your startup is going to generate employment, how will it generate employment? How will it add to the wealth creation of the country, right? What is unique about your startup? So they will not ask you for financials, they will not ask you for anything. They will ask you basic questions about what your startup does and how will it add value. I would recommend getting this registration ASAP, because if you're in your 8th year and you apply for registration, then you have lost the golden period for availing all the benefits and exemptions, right? So at the earliest, whenever you can, once your entity is formed, do this, because it does not ask for any financials. All it says that you have to be an entity that is registered under the Indian laws and certain other requirements, right? So great thing, Startup India registration, especially for all the tech, deep tech. Can anybody tell me what is deep tech? I mean, you're all technology students, right? Engineering and technology. What do you mean when you say this is a deep tech startup? Do you guys know? No, I don't know. I'm asking you, my friend. I do not know what is the exact definition or terminology of a deep tech startup. Right? Now, I don't know. Is it a deep tech startup, which means it goes into your ML AI space, AR VR kind of a concept? It could be. I don't know. So yeah, deep tech startups is again a startup that can benefit. Basically all tech startups can benefit from Startup India registration. Not only tech, even my startup can, because I'm a services related startup, right? So I can also benefit if I'm able to show the government that this is what my company does. Term sheet NDA. NDA we just discovered. That guy said it is a non-disclosure agreement, as the term very clearly states. Before you get into a conversation with anybody, you execute an NDA. What an NDA will say is that whatever